Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drains your soul, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser, the podcast that shines a light on the dark tactics of abusers and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives. I'm Vanessa Reiser, licensed therapist, author, advocate, and fellow warrior on the path to healing from narcissistic and cult abuse. Joining me for many upcoming episodes is my co-host Dave. We'll unpack each conversation together, diving deeper into narcissistic abuse, cult dynamics, politics, pop culture, and what it all means for real life healing. Today, we'll hear harrowing stories from survivors, explore the psychology behind these toxic relationships, and share insights and tools to spot red flags, break free, and begin profound healing. This show is for mature audiences and may include upsetting topics like violence. For full content warnings, sources, and resources, check the episode notes. Guest opinions are their own and don't necessarily reflect mine or any affiliated platforms. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, legal, or medical advice. Today is extra special. I'm beyond honored to welcome one of the most respected, authentic, and life-changing voices in this space, Dr. Ramani Durvasula. For anyone who's new to her work, Dr. Ramani is a clinical psychologist, professor, best-selling author, and quite simply one of the clearest, most compassionate experts on narcissistic abuse and narcissistic personality disorder out there. Through her books like Should I Stay or Should I Go?, It's Not You, and Don't You Know Who I Am?, her TEDx talks, her wildly popular YouTube channel, and her tireless advocacy, she has given millions of survivors the language to name what happened to them, the validation they were denied, and the roadmap to heal. But here's what makes today feel so full circle for me. I'm proud to know Dr. Ramani not just as the brilliant expert the world sees, but as the real, down-to-earth, fiercely kind human she is behind the scenes. Professionally, she's been an inspiration and a guiding light in this field for years. Her integrity, humor, and unwavering commitment to survivors have shaped how I show up as a therapist and advocate. Today, sharing her wisdom with all of you feels like a dream I didn't even know I had until it came true. My mentor, colleague, and friend, Dr. Ramani, thank you for saying yes to this conversation. Thank you for your heart, your brain, and every bit of courage you bring to this work. I'm so happy and deeply grateful to have you as my guest today. Ramani, it is so nice to be with you today. I cannot thank you enough for coming on this podcast. You've changed my life and so many others, and it's so important, the work that you're doing. How are you? Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so glad that you, of all people, are leading these conversations. So I really appreciate you again.
Yeah, we really want to, with this podcast, do it a little bit more rogue. I know so many
Yeah.
people are talking about these things,
Yeah.
and I know you've done this a zillion times, and I know that you are the go-to in this space and have mentored me and have supported me personally, professionally, and I just really think the world of you. And so many people are going to be eager to hear your voice again. But, a couple of things that I think feel relevant today as we're managing the Epstein files and the political climate and, women's rights and things like this really bubbling up and feeling kind of almost hazardous. I wanted to know how you see it changing. How has this changed, this work from day one of Dr. Ramani making her way in the world, maybe going out into an environment where therapists didn't say this? It must have felt kind of rogue to say, like, there are top people, because you're taught, like, hold space for everyone. We're going to rehabilitate, by golly, all of this stuff. How has it shifted? How do you see things today versus when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, it's shifted so many ways. I think one thing that's really shifted is survivors are understanding this, and particularly more than anything, young people are understanding this. Young people now have more of a vocabulary. They call out the dynamics, gaslighting and love bombing, the importance of safety in relationships. And, they're actually, there's again, in a generation where it matters, and younger people, like, they're like, wait a minute, that's not okay. whereas there was much more of a propensity to excuse that behavior in the past. That's one big place. Obviously, social media has proliferated that. Now, I'm not saying it's always good. I do think some of it can be very dismissive. And I think some people are throwing the word around where it might just be a difference in opinion or a stylistic difference and not actually the kind of personality, long-term entrenched kinds of patterns we see. That's one piece. The second piece is I'm seeing not only more therapists understanding it, but a real openness to therapists to get trained in this well. I even just recently had an interaction with a therapist where the conversation was about somebody who was in a definitely, I'd say, like a level 6, level 7 out of 10 kind of a narcissistic relationship, more of that moderate range narcissistic relationship, but it was problematic nonetheless. And the feedback the person was getting is like, you're clever, you're smart, what are you doing? Get out. And I was like, ah, come on. It's still that sense of you got to get out, you got to get out, you got to get out. Some people can, some people can't. To me, when I'm working with a client, the goal, the focal point is agency and clarity in the decision, right? Because there are some people out there who say, you know what? I'm not going to be able to navigate this post separation abuse right now. I don't have what it takes. I don't have the support. I don't have the money. I'm very aware of what's happening, but they're no longer walking around scratching their head and saying, I'm crazy. Now, they may be walking around saying, I can't believe this is my life. This really sucks. I need to care for myself because I'm in a mess. But that's very, very different than a person who's walking around saying, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? To me, that's again, is it ideal? No. But nor is a person sort of spending their days and nights being stalked and living in fear of what's going to happen to their kids or having their electricity turned off. So I think that it's this goal of building agency, and I call sort of clear-eyed agency in our clients without an agenda. And I think that the moment people do start seeing it more clearly and it all sets in and they feel stronger with it, there is a moment when I think the vast majority of people, if they don't fully leave, they certainly disengage so substantially. I think in the case of intimate relationships, would probably be more fashioned as leaving. But like I said, we also live in a complicated time in terms of when we even look at what's happening around immigration. There are a lot of people who are stuck in these relationships now because they cannot leave. Because if that is out of order, they are going to face somebody's like, well, guess who I'm going to call on you? And now they're removed from their kids. We don't stop to think about how these dynamics may be at play when we consider like, well, you just got to get up and go. So I think that there has been an openness to a much more holistic approach to understanding this by many therapists, but not all. And there's still a very vocal group of therapists who say, this is nonsense. This is terrible. How dare you demonize a group of people like this? I get that all the time. And I'm like, okay, we're always going to have the naysayers. I mean, listen, it took a million years to even get trauma to be recognized for what it is. And there's still pushback on that. So I think those are two big places where I've really seen it. I've seen a shift. And obviously now it's even coming into the culture, right? There's films coming out about it. There's a brand new film coming out soon called You're Dating a Narcissist. There was a phenomenal film that killed it on the awards circuit called Bob Trevino Likes It, about a narcissistic father. So these are films that are percolating into the mainstream that aren't even shying away from addressing these dynamics. And even when we look at programs like Succession and things like that, which is an incredibly solid kind of portrayal of what it looks like when money and narcissism collide in a family system. So we're seeing it more and more and more, and people are willing to talk about it more and more that way.
Yeah. I remember when I first started this work, and I know I'm preaching to the choir because as a pioneer, that feeling of like kind of leading the charge, it feels probably pretty isolating for you in some ways because you were kind of out there. Because I even felt it when I started. I was on LinkedIn once and I remember I had posted like a meme or something, and I kind of tiptoed in to do it because I was like, oh, I know this is going to be kind of rogue and it's a little bit risky because, as a social worker, you take this oath, like I'm going to represent, all things. And I remember a few therapists came in and they were like, tisk, tisk, tisk. And now you go on LinkedIn and it's just lighting up narcissistic abuse, Trump this, and everyone sort of has this vernacular and people are starting to commiserate around shared traumas. Maybe it was a mother, maybe it was a brother. And I think a really glaring example, and I wanted to bring this up because this was a New York experience specifically. I don't know if you remember Amy Fisher. back in the 90s. So she shoots Amy Jo in
The
the
Mary
face,
Jo, Mary Jo.
Mary Jo in the face. And, Joey Buttafuoco is essentially raping this 16-year-old Amy Fisher and, triangulates. This is like the quintessential triangulation where he sort of pits them against each other and portrays the wife as being abusive and, you got to get rid of her and then you're my soulmate and all this stuff. And now there's actually a new Lifetime movie coming out. Somebody sent me this YouTube video. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting because it's all of these years later. When I
Sure.
go into the comments, it was comment after comment of he's a narcissist, he's a psychopath. Back then, all we ever did was say, crazy girl shot her in the face.
Correct. 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 And made fun of the wife for not leaving. Right? So that's what we did. And both were completely unacceptable. I mean, I do agree with you, Vanessa. The world, again, I see this more in younger people, frankly, is becoming more trauma informed. And so we understand, like, it has always been easy to sort of demonize the young woman in the relationship without recognizing, like, she was in no position to consent to this, like she was being preyed upon and manipulated and groomed. And you're right, we have vernacular, we have terminology for this now. Now, does that mean that everyone is understanding it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I definitely think you're right. These stories don't wear well. And now when we see them through a different lens, I think a lot of people feel a lot of shame in terms of even how they were viewing the players in the story, because that's how the story was told. I am heartened to see how much more, if you will, more trauma informed, much more of the world than it once was is, so we can hear these stories with the right kind of ear rather than what is typically, again, sort of an anti-woman model of like, oh, this seductress, this person came along and was, like you said, crazy lady, and how wrong those narratives are.
Yeah. And you're seeing it with the Epstein files, right? You're seeing where there's this collective of people who are coming out and, discussing coercive control and how isolated they were and how manipulated they were. And I think that in some ways is a gift, even though that's hard to say
Right.
today in terms of the Trump of it and MAGA and all of this sort of narcissism, flitting about everywhere. But I think that if you're going to find some silver lining, it's that
Mhm.
there's conversations that are happening where they're describing manipulation. We didn't have a
Well,
ton to talk about, even when I started this work 6 years ago. By the way, I left my abuser 6 years ago tonight. So I'm sort of,
wow,
yeah,
the
this is actually,
anniversary date, it's a big deal,
it's
Vanessa.
a big deal. 6 years ago tonight was COVID, the heart of COVID, and it was a big trauma collectively. But, things have changed in 6 years. Things have
Yeah, they have.
changed.
They have.
I mean, I thought it
Mhm.
was worth bringing up because it feels important that, the Epstein files are giving us something. We're discussing things at a minimum. And so there's this bubbling up of, again, that vernacular, this discussion of what does it look like to be coerced? So what's going on? Like, and the
Mhm.
good news, I think, too, about that is it was sort of this polarized Democrat versus Republican argument. And this has kind of globalized it. It takes away that pressure in some ways because it's really a bigger systemic issue,
Mhm.
which then it's like, okay, peel back the onion layer again. Let's dig a little deeper. What is this really about? Oh, it's about narcissism. Oh,
Mhm.
it's about this clinical thing. And you can almost always trail it back. And that's what I wrote my book about, was to fuse those concepts. It's really about the cult thing. It's about the narcissism. It's about all of
Mhm.
it culminating together, mind control and coercion and like how that impacts us. But yeah, I think the Epstein files are, I know it's crazy to say, there's has to be some silver lining. It has to be that we're talking about it.
I think that one thing that the Epstein files has told me, though, and it reminded me of something we don't even talk about enough, is the power of the enablers, right? And somebody who was as exploitative and as manipulative as him, and the indoctrination, if you will, grooming tactics that he was using with powerful, mostly men, though some women, in positions like academia that are considered almost more virtuous kinds of places, and the number of people who fell for it. And to me, Vanessa, the line I draw there is the number of people who fell for his manipulations, because I would imagine for a lot of people, your skin would crawl when you were in the presence of someone like this, right? But the get out of jail free, if you will, the virtue sign of money and success and power and a fancy townhouse and all of that, and how people fall that. And again, I fall for that. I was an academic for years, right? And I got to tell you one thing right now. Any dollar I got for research funding, either I fought like hell to get from the National Institutes of Health, or I would apply within the university for some small seed grants or $500 or $1,000. I certainly wasn't writing emails to some creep in a townhouse in New York thinking that he was going to cut me a damn check. Now, maybe that's how the very elite fund their research. I got to tell you, it wasn't how the rest of us rank and file ordinary professors were doing it. So I think that there was this shared grandiosity amongst these very powerful people that were emboldening this absolutely monstrous human being. And it was a very interesting tactic that he would use. He would engage them in highly inappropriate conversations. It's a classic cult leader technique. He would test the waters to see if they'd say, yeah, no, no more, and cut the conversation, or if they would kind of take the bait and sort of continue in the dance with him, probably thinking all of these rich, powerful people thought, oh, I'm too smart to get pulled into any web here. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to get my little bit of money. I'm going to sidle up to power. I know how to do this. And they were getting played because the fact is, Vanessa, if somebody did say to him, like, hey, that's not that, yeah, no, thanks, no, he might even have reached back in. Epstein would have reached back in and said, come on, I'm telling it a bad, uncomfortable joke. That was ridiculous of me. I'm so sorry. He tested the water. And odds are what that meant was Epstein probably had a shelf in his mind, like, oh, okay, I can only go so far with this one. So when powerful people like this are played, these very same powerful people are behind the levers of power that make decisions around policy around how we treat survivors of sexual assault, where we put women's health dollars, where we, how we make even the people who staff benches in the family court and all of that. I mean, again, I don't want to sound like I'm saying this is some evil cabal, but powerful people, powerful systems, right? And if so many of these people were able to be so played by someone like this, you recognize that they just don't get it. They simply just don't get it. And if they don't get it, that's why we have so much crappy policy that is driving so much of our legal judicial processes. And those are the systems that are doing so much harm to people. And so, like I said, we've come a long way in understanding it. But where I think that the understanding is coming up the slowest are the people who already hold so much societal power.
Well, yeah, and I think what's unfortunate is that the people who are in those positions are similarly thinking. So they're thinking, I too will get away with this, right? So they're all
I don't know.
untouchable.
I don't know if I agree with you. See, this is what I'm saying. I'm
No,
using the term enabler. I think some of them think that they're able to play with the big kids, right? But they don't realize actually some
I
of
see
these,
what you're saying. Right. So not the Trump of it.
it's,
Like,
it's a different species than the people
got
who
it.
are the really horrific things, but
Got
they're
it.
like, I'm savvy enough. I know how to be with this. There's no being with it. It's dangerous, right? It's like you shouldn't have a grenade in your linen closet for a reason because it's going to blow up. So it's people thinking that they're just as clever. I'm like, they're playing a different ground game than you. So I actually think in many cases, these enablers, some, not all, I think some of the people who have been caught up in this net were maybe not as bad actors as Epstein. He's a pretty horrific human being, but I think they're certainly in the same neighborhood. But I also think some of these enablers were just arrogant. They thought they were smarter than everybody else. I think they were a little bit high on their cultural cred and cultural power, but I don't know that they were made of this really awful stuff. And yet they get pulled in. But like I said, they're in decision making positions. I don't even think they thought they were going to get away with anything. I think they thought they could play chess with the devil and walk away from the game unscathed. And that's not how it works.
There's an interesting fallout from this sort of reveal of the files. And I've been thinking about this because, I'm 52 years old and I'm a little bit calloused in terms of the work that I do. And I can understand psychopathy to some extent, which is troubling and scary for people who are neurotypical. But there are young people who have access to the internet, right? Let's say there's like a 9-year-old out there who starts to see, they're eating babies. There's cannibalism involved in the Epstein files and accusations that are really hard to process, even at an advanced age. And I wonder about how that affects the next generation in terms of just imagining that there are these horrors that occur, the reality of that for the next generation. What is that? How is that impact?
This is going to sound like a strange thing to say, is I think all generations have grappled with horror during their youth. Does that make sense? I think this generation is grappling with a different series of horrors. In fact, if you look over time, look, children's stories are horror stories, right? Grimm's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen and all this stuff. It's dark. This stuff is dark. Children have gone through wars. If you think of every generation of children in the last 300-400 years, they were growing up through poverty, through wars. They've seen horror. They've terrible abuse in their homes. What's interesting is, even though now we understand narcissism more, I would argue, though, interestingly, there's probably, I mean, I know people like Steven Pinker would argue this to be the case, that we're probably nicer to each other now. Even, people like Sapolsky would argue we're nicer to each other now than we once were. But I actually think, say, strangely enough, we might be nicer to each other now than we ever were, in terms of the horrors that we would unleash on each other and what children would observe in terms of the early loss of parents, early loss of a mother to childbirth, like all these things. I think kids have always been exposed to horror. I think that's a sad and universal theme for children. And it's not that we can stop all children from being exposed to horror. That's just never going to happen. But what every society and culture can do is protect children in the aftermath of that exposure. We're not doing a good job of, given all the resource we have. We don't do that. Family systems don't
What a
protect
great
them.
point.
School systems don't protect them. Legal
What a great point.
judicial systems don't protect them. So, I mean, children are always going to see horror, but if we can definitely let the child feel you're okay, you're safe, you're not responsible for this, we really have a real shot at it with the kids. But that's not what happens. And so I think
Yeah.
this is a generation having access to a different kind of horror. But I think children have always been at the front row seats of horror, with nobody quite explaining to them what they're seeing.
Yeah, and then you make such a really important point, because it's not the horror, it's the injustice of nothing, no account, nothing happens after
Yeah.
this experience, right? So they're told, okay, go to the police, go to the person, and they're going to protect you. And then you sort of develop this understanding that is absolutely inaccurate. And so that's the chilling truth,
Yeah.
really, is that sort of aftermath. That's
Mhm.
such an important point. I have another question, which is, it's crazy to be talking about cannibalism, but I'm just going to ask you this because I personally understand, or think I understand, cannibalism to be about the same thing that rape is about, which is about power. And so when I saw that in the Epstein files, it really tracked clinically. I was like, well, that's a thing. It could absolutely make sense that they would eat people, because it feels like, it's like, look what I can do. So it doesn't feel that foreign. What are your thoughts on the cannibalism of it all?
I don't know much about. I have to tell you, that part of the file is not one I know much about, so I'm kind of hearing it from you.
Mhm.
I think when we see horror being perpetrated in any of its forms of violence, it is absolutely about power. In some cases, it's about sadism. It's the gratification or even pleasure derived by the suffering of another. That can be in some cases, but sometimes it's just sort of power. It can also be lack of accountability. I'll often say that that's one of the defining characteristics of all the antagonistic personality styles, is this sense of lack of accountability. That, we can have an argument with anyone about just about anything, but if there's accountability in all the ingredients for repair, we can fix the rupture. The course of the relationship may change, but I think that unchecked power, lack of accountability, the kind of psychopathic callousness, and again, the biology of that. Remember, psychopathy is 1% or less. It is not, certainly doesn't have the rates of prevalence of narcissism or even antagonism writ large. And so we're talking about a very rarefied sort of a space and an inhumanity. And when you see the psychopathy mixed with sadism, it's a rare state. I think that that's one thing, is that I don't want people to think like lurking around every corner is some sort of
Cannibal.
thick, like beheading, cannibalistic murderer. That's not it. We wouldn't have a functioning society if that was the case. I mean, listen, what horror films exist? I mean, every horror film is about narcissism, right? Every vampire film is about narcissism. I think it's the form of art where we process these really human fears. The fear of what goes bump in the night, the not being seen, the not being attuned to, the being manipulated. That's a horror film. And so we make those films, which sometimes make it seem like horror in all its forms is more ubiquitous than it actually is. The shock value element of these files is something that is less of my concern. What's more of my concern is how this many people in this many variegated positions of power got pulled into something like this, were so successfully manipulated, groomed, indoctrinated into this, and yet hold decision-making sway over many, many employees, over billions of dollars, over political offices. That's actually the horror to me here, to be honest
Right.
with you. Because the horror there is that has ramifications for how the world runs. And we are all walking around with the illusion that the world is run in a just way, and it's not.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing though. My point really is about the power piece, right? So
Mhm.
this is when it goes unchecked. How far can it go? How far does it, it goes off the tracks and you hear these crazy stories when it's completely unchecked. And that's what's important for people to understand.
We're in.
Reading
It's happening
Yeah,
all over the world, though. I mean,
yeah.
totalitarian, lawless governments all over the world. And we know what this looks like. We know what this looks like from history books, right? Power unchecked is an extraordinarily dangerous thing because it's power for the sake of power. It's just really that. It's like this unending vessel needing narcissistic supply. There can never, ever be enough to have that sense of, and it just gets worse. You would think is there a point of enough? You get enough power. You do enough things. There's a with antagonistic people, there's a certain form of gratification that other people live in fear. Fear and envy very much are positions that like people want to be me or people are terrified of me. Those are big forward facing motivations for people, again, at the much more severe end of the narcissism spectrum, but overall with more antagonistic people. And then that, again, the framework of coercive control is a person who's kept in close proximity through fear.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even, the most covert narcissist, it's still about power and control. This is
Oh,
just the most
oh,
extreme version. And
yes.
so it is relevant because it sort of gives you that glimpse. It's like the ghost of Christmas future. If things don't become checked, how far will they go with this? How far will
Yeah.
they turn up the dial? But yeah, I mean, some people who stay in relationships with narcissists for 30 years and it's sort of just about control that entire time, sometimes that can feel worse than the acute trauma. I mean, the person who keeps me up at night where I'm sleepless is the covert narcissist. To me, that is the
Mhm,
scariest version of this.
mhm,
It's not the overt, I can see you coming, you're a wealthy
mhm,
douchebag. It's
mhm,
the more covert. I think that is the scariest thing that you can ever
mhm,
experience
mhm.
because you're not going to see it. I don't
No,
care who you think
no.
you know. And oftentimes clients will come to me, they had an overt and they'll say, well, he's nothing like Joe. And I'll say,
Mhm,
whoa, that doesn't mean anything. Like this comes in
mhm,
different shapes and
mhm,
sizes
mhm,
because just because he's not this obvious version of it and he's not strangling you, I have to really provide some psychoeducation around like the other versions because those are scarier to
mhm.
me.
Listen, the challenge here is again, it's the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing. And all narcissism has this to greater or lesser degrees. And this is why it's such a vexing issue. The capacity to show up in selected spaces as a highly functioning, smart, charismatic, engaging person. The more we get into the vulnerable narcissistic space, the less that is present. You definitely don't see the sort of social ease. You don't see the charisma. You tend to see more of a socially anxious, brooding, angry kind of a presentation. But still, you might, well, then you think, what would draw someone to that? One on one, there may actually be sort of a someone to be rescued, right? That, woe is me, life was unfair to me, I'm the sad sack story, whatever. And people maybe have been drawn to that. That's its own form of strange seduction, if you will. But even still, even the sort of vulnerable narcissistic person, they can almost make themselves look victimized. Like they'll be at a joyous occasion, I don't know, someone's wedding, and everyone's so happy, and they'll see this sort of sad sack person there in the corner. And now people are like, hey, what's up? And say, oh, I don't know, like these weddings, like I went through a divorce. And, and everyone who's with them's like, God, I feel so bad for them, but God, no, thank you. And so some people feel really compelled to save them, but there's absolutely no regard for how this is affecting this situation or any of that. But I do think that the capacity to show up one way in public, one way in private, which is very, very pronounced, like I said, in the more grandiose, communal, those types of narcissistic presentations, that they can look, they really, it confuses the world. And so the person who's being harmed is going to assume everyone else is right, not them. And I think that that's a real point of confusion in this too. I think with the vulnerable narcissist, it's a little bit more obvious because they are kind of so aggrieved and so angry and nothing's ever fair to me, kind of like they just sort of sound like whiners and people grow tired of them a lot more quickly.
Yeah. I have this curiosity. People come to me all the time and they say, how do I keep the narcissist away from me? How do I stay away from narcissists? How do you answer that question?
I think it's this, listen, we live in the world, right? And you got to go through the world and you may encounter people who have these personalities. I think a couple things I tell people is move slowly, move very slowly when you meet new people. Be careful. Narcissism's an interesting kind of an inverted state, right? The more they get to know you, the more dangerous it becomes, right? Whereas other people, the more they get to know you, probably the more safe the relationship feels, like you have a shared history. The more the narcissistic person gets to know you, the more they know you, the more they have sort of mirrored, downloaded, echoed all the things that people do. But I do think that I always tell people, it's sometimes the people, so in one group, one bucket of people are the people who look too good to be true. They're almost too friendly. Now, that's not saying every friendly, warm, sweet golden retriever of a human being is narcissistic. What it means is like, just, don't go all in, like just hold back just a little, get to know people. Really where it gets tricky is people who have those really sort of socially forward facing things. They've got the money, they've got the job, they've got the big promise. Oh, I know a guy and that guy's going to help you meet this guy. And then they're all going to help you do the this and the do the that. It's almost like the person who's going to kind of make your dream come true kind of thing. You want to be careful when you look at people who are, that do things that very much matter to you. It's almost like not falling for the too good, too good to be true is that's the key. I just don't know that we fully avoid this. All the time, Vanessa, and I'm sure it's true in your life, all the time I'll run it into it here. Maybe not someone who's fully narcissistic, but definitely showing the patterns. I'm like, man, did I just get played again? I didn't get played. I sensed it and I was like, okay, now we're going to listen to the data. Just because I've known this person for 10 years doesn't mean I'm reading it wrong. I've known this person, but maybe we've never been at this relational juncture. Life happens, different stresses come in, and most people have an upper limit, right? The more narcissistic a person is, the lower that upper limit is. And so you hit it. When real life happens, they just can't get out of their own way. Again, maybe even narcissism's too heavy a word, but I tell folks it's less about avoiding them than knowing that you can make the choice to disengage from them when the patterns start feeling uncomfortable. I think if you make your life about, I want to avoid them all, you're going to spend your life avoiding. But if you spend your life saying, I'm going to understand this, I'm going to listen to my body, I'm going to pay attention to when I feel like I can't show up safely as my true self, then this is a problem in this relationship. I feel hyper censored. We've got a problem here. And I have to look inward and say, what's happening in this relationship? Listen, other people may get along fine with this person. Probably not if you're having this big a problem with them, but in some ways, other people don't matter. You're struggling with it. Listen to it. That's the piece, Vanessa. It's not the not meeting them in the first place. It's having the tools to be able to react quickly when it becomes clear to you.
I totally agree with that. People ask me that question all the time. The best answer I give is that if you stay connected to your hobbies, if you stay connected to your finances, your career, your friends, your autonomy, your self-love, they tend to move away. They're almost like allergic to that experience because they want to groom you. So as long as you stay sturdy, you're going to bump into them in life. That's just the way it goes. But as long as you're connected to those things, it's harm reduction. It's not a solve, but it's, you're insulated. So that I think is important, is people stay connected to themselves, because once you, do that stuff where you're like forgiving and give the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to lean into this and make excuses and all of this, sometimes it's too late when you wake up and
Mhm.
you've figured out that you've been manipulated. It
Mm.
could be just a year later, but then all of a sudden, now you're in that cycle. Now
Mhm.
you're a
Mhm.
year quickly becomes 7 years, 10 years, because you're going to make
Mm.
excuses and you're going to, once the trauma bond is developed, it's very hard to
Yeah.
extricate yourself from those
Yeah.
environments. So I tell my clients, take notes. It's okay. Push back, say no. Your sovereignty is at stake. So I
Yeah.
don't think that you have to do anything other than
Yeah.
take care of yourself. And I think women specifically are uncomfortable with this idea. I have to do a lot of CBT to get them their inner dialogues to be really empowering, because they're not so comfortable with the idea of not doing the things and not being loving and caring and kind and all of that stuff, which are great ways to be, but they're not mutually exclusive from them really being empowered and leaning into their own self-love. I have this wonderful question for you, because I know people say to me all the time, Dr. Ramani changed my life. And you and I have talked about this personally, and people I know all the time are just, Dr. Ramani changed my life. I know it's a thing. Like, it's probably a t-shirt somewhere. But what moves you? What experiences do you have, whether it's in this space or otherwise, that you feel moved by?
I think I know the experiences that move me are when I really do see that process of a person ungaslighted, right? It's like I'm watching somebody pull a curtain from over their face, over their eyes. Like something covered their head, like, when they take someone to rob them, like you pull that over them and they finally see it. And that's why I call the book It's Not You. It's really, they're like, this really isn't me. This is a pattern. I will always tell you, it's the moment I remember when I loved algebra, but there was a moment in 10th grade. I had a phenomenal teacher named Miss Gallagher. I'll never forget the moment I got algebra. And then it's like she couldn't give me enough homework. There was no getting anything but 100% in her class. That combination of a teacher who really broke it down so simply and me being the sponge ready for it. But then when I was like, oh my gosh, like this is great. Like I can't go wrong in this class because it's a formula, right? And then it became a puzzle and then it became fun. I don't know if this would ever be fun, but I think for me, the moment is that when people can really understand things like what is happening in this relationship, this is not okay. Just because it's not okay doesn't mean you have to leave. I just want people to clock that interaction, not okay. What you do with it, that's your agency and choice. What we're going to break you of is the idea that you're going to fix them and that it's above all else for you to feel like you're safe in yourself and that there are places you can show up as yourself are so important. Now and I know that's a bigger challenge. Some folks who really had early childhood adversity and trauma, that sense of self didn't ever get to develop well. And so that's a deeper archaeological dig to even figure out what that is and what it means to feel safe. But it's the curtain coming off the face and a person saying, oh my gosh, like this is a thing. And then that really, it's like me in the algebra class, like now I got it. Didn't mean I can, when the algebra test was hard, I still had to think about it, right? You still have to think about it. I think that's a big one. The other big piece is the therapists that are getting trained. I really, really am seeing therapists are getting it, they're paying attention, they're implementing it, they are extremely grateful for that. It's not the TikTok advice of girl, you got to go kind of thing. It's much more of a culturally humble, informed, like we want agency. Whatever choice the client makes, we want them to feel that they made it versus them feeling like they've disappointed the therapist by not getting up and going. Like rather them feeling like I'm not strong or I'm embarrassed by this choice. I made this choice because it was right for me. It was right for my kids. It was right from like this makes sense for me. And not because like I think they're going to change. That piece of it, getting that into the therapeutic training has been really, really, that's probably the thing I keep fighting for because the more therapists that get this, then the more clients, if they get in end up in a good therapist office, are going to get feedback that sort of uncrazies them, and leaves them
Yeah.
feeling like, now you're seeing this clearly. It's an uncomfortable thing to see clearly, but you are seeing it clearly. So those are
Yeah.
the big ones for me.
I think it makes sense that you, as an academic, because I know a little bit about your background in the teaching world, and it makes sense that you would be impacted by Mrs. Gallagher, I think was
Mhm,
her name, right?
mhm.
And you would be sort of wanting to provide, it's totally your brand to be teaching, right? This feels like it's totally
Yeah.
perfect for the lessons that you give all of
Yeah.
us. And it makes sense that you would reflect on that. And that's so important. And I also think that, to your point, there's a power in therapists being informed. It's
Uh-huh.
extremely
Yeah.
powerful
Mhm.
because what happens in that realm is when my clients come to me, they are being gaslit. They don't
Mhm.
understand what's going on, and that they know I've gone through it. First of all, they don't feel safe unless they understand that I get it, because it's so hard to conceptualize. It really is hard.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. Why would he lie about the
Mhm.
coffee being black or having sugar in it? It's these little things that make no sense. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. Why would he lie about that? So it's all illogical. It's nonsensical stuff that's swirling around them. So when they come in and they understand that it's by design that you're being confused, the validation that comes from that as a collective by therapists feels extremely empowering. And I know the work that you're doing now, to provide, continuing ed credits and stuff for clinicians is so important. But there's a power in the language, and there's a power in the therapist doing that. Thank you for, continuing to move the needle there, because it's extremely important. I had no idea what this was. I was a fucking therapist. We've talked about this. It's wild, and I'm not alone. But then I guess, sort of, now that we're talking about gaslighting, I do want to ask you this question. I've heard some crazy gaslighting stories. Like, I just have. There have been some gaslighting stories. I had this one client, he was in the UK, and his brother had like cyber hacked his Apple ID or something, and was listening to his music, and he would sing the songs in the house of this guy's playlist. And his brother would say, like, what are you doing? Why do you know the songs? Whatever. And he would continue to sort of push back and be reactive around this. And his brother subsequently has him put in an institution, this kind of stuff. So the gaslighting isn't just, I think what people don't realize is gaslighting isn't like, I didn't say that, you're crazy. It's this insidious thing that can happen, whether it's cyber or somebody moves the hair dryer. And I think people get confused around gaslighting, but it's not just even words. It could just be somebody does something in your environment to move something and make it strange, so you become confused or take something from you. And I think that the gaslighting of it all is really important, the language that they're using also. Do you have a story? Do you have a version of gaslighting that you found so compelling? Was there some story that someone told you and you just thought, oh my God, like this is the level that they would go to?
One person was telling me, and I think it was Dan Siegel that was talking about term. What a narcissistic person wants is what we call epistemic power, right? They want power. It's basically just a fancy way of saying power over the narrative. It's what I say. It's like, it's 95 degrees outside. It's actually 10 degrees outside, but it's 95 degrees outside. So we're going to run the air conditioner. You're like, what? You're not hungry, so we're not going to eat for a few hours. They want to hold all the information. They want to corner the market on reality. That's really what it is. And that's sort of the source of a lot of what looks so delusional,
I
manipulative.
love that.
And
Yep.
so,
Corner the market on
yeah.
reality.
And then when whoever holds reality holds all the power, right? That's why whoever holds the media holds so much power, because they get to control reality. For the longest time, we trusted media. I don't think we'd be fools to do that anymore, but many people still do. But in terms of, I think I have to say a lot of the gaslighting stories where it was environmental manipulation were the ones like, somebody was once telling me how the children's like clothing would go missing. It would just go missing. Right. And like certain things from the pantry, like whatever, certain ingredients, like things you'd need not often, but like,
Right.
I don't know, like a bottle of olive oil or something like that. Those things would go missing and would say, have you seen the olive oil? And like the partner would look up and say, you just bought it. Like, what? Like what's up with you? And it was such a dismissive response, but they're like, I did just buy it. You're kind of going bonkers looking for it. And then what would happen is this person to whom this was happening saying, I cannot believe how absent-minded I am. And the person was young for menopause, but they actually went to the doctor and saying, can we do blood work? I am still getting my period. I'm wondering if I'm perimenopausal. They got really afraid that there was something medically wrong with them. They had a relative that had early onset Alzheimer's. They thought maybe it was that.
Right.
Like when you think about that, we can say, oh, that chuckle. It wasn't a chuckle to them. They went through
Right.
something extraordinarily real and then the clothes would magically appear again, and then different ones would disappear. So it was a really, really menacing kind of a thing. Came to find out Much later, the lady had a cleaner that came in and said, "Can you let me know?" And the cleaner is like, "I don't know what you're saying. Like, the things are where they're supposed to be." But the partner had gotten to cahoots with the cleaner to trick
Oh,
the person, right? Then the relationship ended. The partner found a new, much younger partner, moves out, and nothing ever went missing again, right? So it was this, and then as the person was healing and really kind of said, the cruelty of that, which was really, as you said, wasn't a lie. It was deliberately to try to drive this person crazy. And this person really did. She told me she became much more isolated from friends. She started becoming worried that she wouldn't be a competent parent. Well, if I'm forgetting all this, what if I forget my kid in the car? What if I forget this? It was causing so much acute distress. And almost just like in the old film, Gaslight, in this case, it was a husband, even recruited people who worked in the household to do their bidding because I think he was just paying them more. But then one day, mercifully, this person got out of the relationship and in the most merciful way. The best thing I always tell people, they're always surprised when I say this, the best thing that could ever happen is that the narcissistic person leaves you. Now, some people say that left them with a broken heart. Post-separation abuse is much worse than a broken heart. Trust me on this one. And so the fact is that for her, she got lucky. He left for someone younger. She said, I don't even care about that. It's like, it's just a bad look. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the children, all of that. But ultimately, everything was kind of back as it should be. And I've heard multiple variants on this kind of environmental sort of manipulation kind of a story. So I think that was striking to me because the person really felt that their physical body,
right.
their mental health, they doubted themselves as a parent. They started hiring someone to come around with them when they were with the kids, thinking like, I'm afraid I'll let them drown. I'm afraid I'll forget them in the car. So it was costly. It was just terrible. When you watch this person be taken apart in this way. And now, though, slowly coming back to confidence. I mean, I have to say, Vanessa, I know not everyone can get out, but just merely not having to live under the same roof as this husband her mental health. I have to say it improved in like 6 months. She was
Yeah.
healthier. I mean, being in the wake of these things makes people sick. That's the bottom line. Doesn't mean you can't heal if you're still in it, but you better have some other supports. I always say like these other supports are like dialysis because you need the toxins to constantly be plunged out of you.
That's a great metaphor. And this is sort of the last kind of part of what I'm thinking we can sort of wrap up with, but you make such a good point, which is that the gaslighting in that scenario quickly crosses over into the smear campaign, because what do they do right after that is say you're crazy,
You're
right?
crazy. Right.
So here comes the smear campaign, shows up. And I was talking to a few of the Epstein survivors recently about how Jeffrey Epstein had reached out to one of their parents.
Yeah.
He also, in the emails, was describing this person as mentally unwell.
Mhm.
So all of that does quickly cross over into the smear of it all. Now there's this groundwork being laid that you're crazy, you're not well, you're this, you're that. So you could see that this is kind of this forethought that they have where, they're thinking about it ahead of time. It's not accidental in some cases where they know what they're doing. People ask me all the time, do they know what they're doing? I would say by and large, a good amount do know what they're
Sometimes.
doing,
Sometimes they do,
right?
sometimes they do. The more
Right.
severe, I think the more intentional the manipulations are. I think at some level, it is as simple as the narcissistic person is centered in their own lens. No one else can fit in. So everything they do is self serving. And when a puzzle piece doesn't fit, the narcissistic version of cognitive dissonance is, well, then I'm going to shame or destroy or diminish someone else so I can remain in this top position, right? So, in other words, someone else around them is doing well, someone else around them is getting attention, right? So, I'm going to ruin the party. I'm going to insult them. I'm going to say, gosh, you're so needy for attention. I'm going to do something to knock them down. That's the cognitive dissonance. I think because it's so baked into the personality, narcissistic person sort of operates almost under the surface. It's how they go through the world. And that's a big part of, it feels tactical, but it's also just sort of how they go through the world. And that
Yeah, I
and I
like how you said baked in. It feels like it's,
say that to people because the
yep.
biggest hardest thing people say is like, don't they care for me? And I'm like, it's the wrong question, right? To which I'd say probably not, because it's all about them trying to constantly be that epistemic power. Like they always have to be the ones in control. It has to be about them. It has to be centered on them. Things have to be going their way. This is why people in narcissistic relationships get so easily tricked at times, because if things in the narcissistic person's life are going the way they want, they have the job they want, they're making the salary they want, all the things are going their way. When things are going their way, they can actually fit a few other people in the screen with them, right? So you sort of feel like you're along for a really nice, you're not. It's just that they're really well supplied. So they're kind of relaxing a little bit. They're not so much on this kind of vigilant, sort of threat perceiving way of being, which is very classically narcissistic. They relax. And you, especially if you're a new person in their life and you being, their partner or something like that, he's either getting them power in the world or recognition, or they're happy to have an attractive partner, whatever it may be. You're part of the supply network, so you're going to stay in the middle of the lens. But heaven forbid the day when someone's like, wow, your girlfriend looks a little bit smarter than you, all hell is going to break loose. It could be the most silly, frivolous comment, but then that's it. Now it's disrupted sort of the way they need the universe to be
Yeah.
to be run. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a heavy question, but I'd love to play with this with you, because I think about how this political environment sort of ends, right? So I think of like America as she needs to get pushed down the stairs before she understands that she needs to extricate herself from this cult. And I'm not going to ask you like, how does America save itself? Because I feel like that's too much pressure. But are there ways that you see us having a collective awakening? I do think that I have to believe there's some hope that people begin to glitch out of the groupthink scenarios that we're seeing and start to think more independently. Are there ways that we can achieve this, where we can have some cohesiveness, where we can cross the aisle, where it's less polarized, things that you think would add value?
I think that when we take a page out of the great Judith Herman's playbook, when she's basically, her and many other trauma theoreticians and researchers hold that trauma that happens in relationship can only be healed in relationship. We can't be sort of lone wolves, sort of all fighting this battle. We have to draw into community. This is why grassroots stuff is so powerful. And it doesn't have to necessarily be politically grassroots or whatever. We can attempt to create the communities we want to live in, whatever that looks like, whether it's volunteering, whether it's kindness to a neighbor, whether it's taking more time to actually talk to people in person in your life, connect with the people in your life. Like, again, the revolution is to not keep playing the ground game of getting more and more stuck on our phones, more and more stuck in digital spaces, more and more stuck buying stuff and trying to look the way the world tells us and trying to keep up with an Instagram algorithm. That is a life that somebody's telling you to live. And when people band together, this is where the change happens. This has been the origin of every single revolution that has ever happened in human history. And so, but that does mean we have to get off our sofas, get out of our houses, and get into the same spaces and have the conversations, create community, find ways to engage the children in your community. The way a lot of SNAP benefits were cut, go volunteer, give money to a food bank, figure it out that way. Yes, vote. Get involved in whatever that looks like. Vote, give money to candidates in swing states. Find the ways to make the changes, but stop looking to the people who already hold the power in society to be the ones to make the change. That's what's not going to happen. That's sort of the mess we're in. And listen, pendulums swing, Vanessa. They always do. And this pendulum will swing too, but a lot of things are going to get damaged in the interim. But it's the constant anger isn't going to work. Drawing into community will, because polarization, black and white thinking, it sells. It's capitalism's friend. It's people thinking in such polarized ways, right? Because then there's something you can buy to fix it. It's finding the gray, because all the answers are in the gray. Even a person who has an opinion very different than yours, if you can climb into the gray and be curious about it, you'll actually have a little bit more insight. You may still not want to spend time with them, but you're like, okay, I think I kind of get some of this. Instead of just, we can't dismiss everybody on the other side of an opinion of us as being complete fools. We're going to remain stuck in that. Even this almost takes us back to narcissism, in the sense that it's very, very perilous if we're like, narcissistic people are bad people. I don't think narcissistic people are bad people. I think narcissistic people are fragile people, they can be insecure people, they can be manipulative people, they can sometimes even be people with histories of trauma. They're complicated people. They're not healthy people to be in relationships with. And these are going to be limited relationships. All those things are true. And by understanding that doesn't mean everyone has to go end their relationships with their parents or their partners. It's that I may need to navigate this differently and trust my reality. That's the revolution, right? This is a mess. What's going on around us in the world right now is a mess, and understanding that, because right now people still want the children's tale of everyone lived happily ever after. Everyone can get along. And these are very patriarchy based tales. Like the big leader in charge is always the king is always going to care about his subjects. Kings don't care about their subjects. They're the king. They're fine. They live in a castle. They got plenty to eat. So we've got to get away from that and really, again, join in community. And I think honestly the greatest revolution of all is if people could remain embedded in their reality. And if they could, they'd be like, okay, I'm much more clear, instead of letting it be manipulated again by algorithms run by some pretty heinous billionaires.
This is a teaching moment for me, what you just offered me. So thank you. When you said climb into the gray, I
Mhm.
really had this incredible sort of clinical metaphor hit me where it's like when we talk about neuroplasticity
Mhm.
as a collective, we're traumatized.
Correct.
America is traumatized. So if we can move that sled out of the snowbank that we're going into and sort of think differently and move away from our trauma focused responses to what's going on around us and try to lean into all of that community stuff that you're talking about and like things that are really important, like people and the earth and nature and animals and, kind of get into a healing space. I think that will heal our traumatized
Mhm.
brain. So there's a neuroplasticity that I feel percolating now in my own mind. Thank you for that teaching moment because I have been so rigid in my own expressions around what I've been witnessing as somebody who has been traumatized on a micro and macro scale. It's important for me to lead my own lifestyle, my own life, and lean into the gray a little bit more. And hopefully people will fall
Yeah.
in line.
No, it's leaning into the gray. Leaning in the gray doesn't mean you're making excuses. It doesn't mean you're rationalizing their point of view. It doesn't mean you're selling yourself out. It means that you're seeing it, and you may very well see it and say, this doesn't feel safe to me, but I also understand part of where it's coming from. And I can respectfully disengage from some of this, but armed with the why. I think that is how we heal. That's how we heal. And you're right. It does very much relate to neuroplasticity. So thank you for that point of view.
Woo, girl. Always a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you. Really love it.
Always so
Thank you.
amazing to be with you. And I can never thank you enough for the time. I know you're busy, but it really is important. All the things you're doing, all the work that you're doing. So thank you so
Thank
much. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was so lovely to see you, Vanessa.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today on Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. If this episode resonated with you, or if you recognize any of these patterns in your own life or someone you care about, know that you are not alone and healing is possible. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more survivors who need to hear these messages. For exclusive bonus content, deeper discussions with Dave and me, and ways to support the show, join us on Patreon or follow along on Instagram or YouTube at Vanessa Reiser LCSW. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and walking toward the light. And remember, healing is a radical rebellion, and your peace is the revolution. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.